Story 1. I've never been a big fan of staying late at school, but that night I had to participate in an activity of the theater group. It was past 8, and the building was practically empty, only a few lights on in the main corridors. Before leaving, I decided to stop by the men's bathroom on the second floor. I entered without thinking too much, just wanting to wash my hands before going home. It was then that I heard a flush echoing from inside one of the boxes. I thought there was still someone there, but soon after I heard light steps, as if someone was moving inside. I was strange because I hadn't seen anyone enter when I arrived. I bent down to look under the box door where the sounds came from, and there were no feet. The space was empty. At that moment, I felt my body crash. I spent a few seconds staring at the empty space, trying to convince myself that maybe I had deceived myself. But the noise of the discharge still echoed in my head, and the steps had been too sharp for me to be confused. I got up quickly and decided to leave there without thinking twice. As I went through the bathroom, the feeling of being watched only increased. I pushed the door to leave, and at the same moment I crossed the threshold, I heard a loud bang. The door slammed behind me hard, as if someone had pushed. The noise echoed through the empty corridor, making me run without looking back. I ran to the end of the corridor and only stopped when I got to the stairs. My heart was racing, and the first thing I did was look around to make sure there was no one following me. But the whole building seemed empty. The doors of the rooms were closed, and the fluorescent lights flashed from time to time, making the environment even stranger. I tried to calm down by telling myself that maybe it was the wind or some problem in the structure of the building. But the more I thought, the less sense it made. The bathroom had no open windows, and the door was too heavy to close by itself with that force. The memory of the noise of the discharge and the steps made me even more certain that I was not alone inside. I decided to go down the stairs as soon as possible, but when I got to the ground floor, I realized that the main corridor was completely empty and silent. The echo of my own steps seemed to multiply, as if it came from various directions. I passed in front of the glass door that led to the parking lot, and, for a second, I considered simply running out of there without going back to get my backpack that I had left in the auditorium. Still, I took a deep breath and decided to go back to get it. I crossed the corridor in a hurry, and the closer I got to the room, the more I felt the weight of that silence. It was as if every lamp above me was about to go out at any moment. I took my backpack, and when I turned to return, I clearly heard the sound of a flush again, coming from the same bathroom I had been in minutes before. At that moment, my legs almost didn't respond. I knew there was no one up there, but the sound was as clear as the first time. I decided not to check. I left the auditorium and crossed the corridor towards the exit door as fast as I could. Still, I felt as if something was following my steps, even if the building remained in absolute silence. When I finally pushed the exit door, the street air brought me some relief. But when I looked back through the glass, I saw the bathroom at the end of the corridor. The door was ajar, and for a moment I swore to see a dark shadow moving inside, as if waiting for me to come back. I didn't wait for anything else. I ran to the car and left there without looking again. At home, I tried to convince myself that it had been just fatigue after a long day, but it didn't help. The more I thought, the more I remembered the sound of the discharge and the steps inside the empty box, and especially the door slamming behind me so hard. That had no logical explanation, not inside a closed and silent building like it was that night. I never entered that bathroom after work again. Whenever I need to stay late at school, I make a point of using the one on the ground floor near the exit. Still, every time I pass through the corridor on the second floor, I feel the same tension, as if something was watching me from inside that door. And you, would you have the courage to look under a box after hearing footsteps in an empty bathroom? Story 2. I studied in a tutoring program at night at school, and usually I didn't think it was strange to stay there until later. But on one of the nights, something happened that I never forgot. The room was stuffy, and I asked the teacher to go out for a moment to drink water. When I opened the door, I realized that the corridor was practically off. Only a lamp was flashing, right in the stretch where the drinking fountain was. At first I thought it was just an electrical problem. After all, that building was old and always had lighting failures. I started walking down the corridor, with the sound of my own steps echoing on the floor. It was then that I clearly heard other steps behind me, as if someone had left the room too. I turned quickly, hoping to see some colleague, but the corridor was completely empty. I stood still for a few seconds, trying to listen again. The silence was absolute, only interrupted by the weak buzz of the flashing lamp. I shook my head, thinking that maybe it was an echo of my own steps, and kept walking towards the drinking fountain. But the closer I got, the stronger the feeling that someone was following me closely. I arrived at the drinking fountain and leaned over to drink, but it was at that moment that the steps came back, this time more hurried, as if they were right behind me. I raised my head at once, turned my body fast, and again there was no one. The corridor was still empty, and the doors of the rooms were all closed. The lamp above flashed nonstop, creating strange shadows on the walls. At this point, I didn't want to stay there anymore. I decided to run back to the living room, but as soon as I took the first step in the opposite direction, I heard a loud click, as if one of the doors had opened behind me. I stopped on the spot, my heart racing, and quickly looked back. All the doors were still closed, aligned, but I was sure that the noise had not been imagination. I started walking faster, trying not to look to the sides, when suddenly the lamp above the drinking fountain went out for good. The corridor was completely dark for a few seconds, until another more distant light turned on by itself, illuminating only the end of the corridor. The feeling I had was that something was guiding me there, as if I was forced to go through all that darkness. I took a deep breath and started walking, even with my hands shaking. Each step seemed higher than usual, echoing through the silent corridor. When I was almost back in the room, I heard the steps behind me again, following the rhythm of mine. This time it wasn't just once or twice, it was several steps in a row, heavy, as if someone was running towards me. I suddenly came, ready to face anything, but there was no one. The corridor was empty, dark, and the only thing I could hear now was my own accelerated breathing. The detail that made me really freeze was realizing that the doors of the nearest rooms were half open, when I had seen them all closed minutes before. At that moment, I didn't think of anything else but running. I crossed the corridor practically blindly, feeling the cold wind passing by me, as if something was right behind me. I only slowed down when I got to the door of the reinforcement room and pushed it hard, closing it immediately. My colleagues looked at me scared, and I made up some excuse about being sick, just so I wouldn't have to explain what had happened. Even back in the illuminated room, I couldn't calm down. The sound of the steps still echoed in my head, and the image of the half-open doors remained clear in my memory. I tried to focus on the rest of the class, but every noise in the hallway made my body shiver. I knew that if I went out to that corridor again, I wouldn't have the courage to cross it alone. When the class ended, I asked a colleague to accompany me to the exit. The corridor was normal again, with all the lights on and the doors closed, as if nothing had happened. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. The sound of the footsteps, the flashing lamp, and the doors opening by themselves were too real details to be just the result of fatigue. Until today, whenever I need to stay later, I avoid going through that corridor alone. I prefer to go all the way around the building, just so I don't have to cross that stretch. And you, would you have the courage to walk through a completely erased corridor, listening to footsteps behind you, even knowing that there is no one there? Story 3. I never really liked using the bathrooms further away from the school, but that morning I had no choice. The one in the main corridor was closed for cleaning, so I had to go to the one at the end of the second floor, one that almost no one used. As soon as I pushed the door, I noticed right away that there was something wrong. One of the boxes had the door completely shattered, as if someone had kicked it hard. The detail is that I knew that bathroom had been closed for months. I had never seen anyone enter there since they put up the warning sign. Still, the scene seemed recent, as if the damage had happened that same morning. The wood of the door was chipped, pieces scattered on the floor, and in the latch, there were dark marks that made me freeze. When I looked more closely, I realized it was dry blood. I stood still for a few seconds, trying to process what I was seeing. It wasn't a huge amount, but the stains were there, right on the latch, as if someone had forced the exit from inside the box. I looked at the rest of the bathroom, and there was no sign of recent movement, no forgotten backpack, no trace of cleaning. It was as if everything had happened there, and then the place had simply been abandoned. My first instinct was to leave there at the same time, but at the same time curiosity held me back. I took a few steps closer and slowly pushed the broken door, trying to see the inside of the box. The floor was covered with dust, but there were strange marks near the drain, as if something had been dragged. The more I looked, the more it seemed that that bathroom was not as disabled as they said. The silence inside that bathroom was suffocating. Even the sound of the corridor seemed distant, as if I had crossed to another place. I approached the broken latch and lightly ran my hand through the dark mark. The texture was rough, confirming that it was not paint or rust. My heart raced when I realized that, in fact, it looked like dry blood. I took a step back and looked around again. All the other doors were intact, but the reflection of the cracked mirror near the sinks made me notice something strange. It seemed that a shadow passed quickly behind me. I came on time, but there was no one. The bathroom was still empty, and even so the feeling that I wasn't alone only increased. At that time, I wanted to run away, but my legs didn't respond immediately. I stared at the broken box, waiting for some movement, as if something would appear from there at any moment. The strangest thing is that the air was heavy, and each breath seemed more difficult. I had the impression of hearing a muffled sound coming from the bottom, almost like nails scraping against the tile. I didn't want to wait to confirm. I took my backpack that I had left in the sink and went towards the door, but before leaving I looked back one last time. The shattered door seemed even more twisted than when I entered, and the stained latch was still visible, like a warning. I pushed the bathroom door hard and went out into the hallway, trying not to run so as not to attract attention, but inside I just wanted to disappear from there. During the rest of the morning, I couldn't concentrate on anything. Every time I closed my eyes, I remembered the marks on the latch and the sound I had heard, as if someone had really tried to get out of there. I decided to comment with a colleague who had also stayed late at school a few times, and he said he had never seen anyone move that bathroom, but he had already heard stories of noises coming from there when the building was empty. This only increased my discomfort, because I knew I hadn't imagined it. The broken door, the dried blood, the marks on the floor, everything was there, visible. The board said that the bathroom was closed due to structural problems, but none of this explained what I had seen. Since then, I started to avoid even the corridor on the second floor, as if just passing close I could already hear those dragged steps again. To this day, when I remember that bathroom, I feel a strange cold in my stomach. I never had the courage to go inside again, even after they renovated part of the building and said that the space would be reopened. For me, that broken door is still proof that something happened there, something that the school never explained. The most disturbing thing is to think that if someone really tried to get out of the inside, no one ever said who it was. Whenever I go through silent corridors, I remember the reflection in the mirror and the feeling of not being alone in that forbidden bathroom. And you, would you have the courage to open the door of a destroyed box when you notice blood marks on the latch, knowing that it should have been abandoned for months? Story 4. It was an ordinary day at school, nothing special happening, until I entered the women's bathroom during the break between classes. It was empty, just the sound of the dripping taps. When I looked up at the mirror, I got an immediate fright. It was written on red lipstick in large letters, "I'm still here." For a second, I thought it was some stupid student joke, but the message made me restless. I left quickly, but I didn't say anything to anyone at that moment. I kept trying to convince myself that it was just some dull joke, but the phrase wouldn't leave my head. A few hours later, I went back to the bathroom accompanied by a colleague, wanting to show her what I had seen. To my surprise, the mirror was completely clean, with no trace of the writing. It was then that we noticed something on the floor. Inside one of the boxes, there was a used lipstick that fell next to the closed door. At the time, I exchanged a look with my colleague, and none of us had the courage to open the box door. The lipstick was there, rolled sideways, as if it had fallen out of someone's hand a short time ago. The detail is that the bathroom had been empty all morning, and no one had commented on any cleaning. It was as if the message had never existed. My colleague laughed nervously and said that probably someone was trying to scare us, but the truth is that not even she could hide the discomfort. The idea that someone could be there minutes before, writing in the mirror, was too disturbing. Just imagining someone locked in the box, hearing us enter, already gave a strange chill. We were silent for a few seconds, trying to decide if we should open the box or just leave. In the end, we decided to leave without touching anything. We closed the bathroom door behind us and ran back to the living room, pretending that nothing had happened. But the feeling that someone was watching us behind that door didn't let me go for the rest of the day. When class ended, I had to go through the corridor again where the bathroom was. The door was open and the lights on, but I didn't have the courage to look inside. My heart raced just remembering the phrase in the mirror. The strangest part was thinking about who would have written that and why, especially knowing that, in a matter of hours, the message had disappeared as if it had never been there. The next day, I told the story to another friend who also used that bathroom often. She told me that she had already heard old comments that, years ago, a student had had a bad time in there and had never returned to school. He didn't give many details, but the way he spoke, a little uncomfortable, only increased my restlessness. I was wondering if the phrase, "I'm still here," could have any connection with that. So I decided to go back alone, just to confirm that I hadn't imagined anything. I entered slowly, looked at every corner, and the bathroom seemed normal. But when I passed in front of the mirror, I had the clear impression that my reflection was blurred for an instant, as if another image was overlapping with mine. It was too fast for me to be sure, but enough to make me run out of there. I could never use that bathroom the same way again. Whenever I enter, I feel the need to check the mirror twice, as if I expected to see that sentence written in red lipstick again. The lipstick found on the floor was never explained, and until today no one assumed to have done that. For me, it's as if the message had been left on purpose, so that only I saw it. To this day I don't know if that was a cruel joke or something much stranger. But the memory of the clean mirror, hours later, is what bothers me the most. How does something like that disappear without leaving a trace? Maybe I'll never find out. And you, would you have the courage to look at your reflection in a school mirror after finding a phrase like, "I'm still here," written on it? Story 5. I used to train in the school gym after class, so it was not unusual to stay there until later. That night, almost everyone was leaving, and I was still packing my things when I passed by the men's locker room. That's when I heard a loud metallic sound, as if someone was slamming a closet door hard, repeatedly. At first, I thought it was some colleague who was still changing clothes, but when I entered I realized that all the lockers were open and empty, except one. His door shook alone, vibrating as if someone was punching from the inside out. The noise echoed through the entire locker room, and I was paralyzed for a few seconds, trying to understand what was happening. The first thing I thought of was calling the janitor. I almost ran down the corridor and found him closing the gym. I quickly told what I had seen, and he laughed lightly, saying that it was probably just some closet with the lock loose. Even so, he agreed to come back with me to check. As we walked, my heart was still racing, because I knew it wasn't just a loose door slamming. When we entered the locker room together, the silence was absolute. No closet vibrated, no metallic sound echoed through the place. They were all open, including the one I had seen closed and beating so hard minutes before. The scene was so normal that I began to doubt my own memory, but at the same time I was sure I hadn't imagined it. The janitor gave me a suspicious look and said that I was probably tired, that the empty gym could play tricks on our heads. I agreed with my head just to close the subject, but inside I was convinced that it wasn't that. The noise had been too loud, constant, and the door really shook as if someone was inside. There was no way to confuse. I stood there for a few minutes, while the caretaker finished closing the gym lights, trying to create courage to approach that specific closet. When I finally went to him, I noticed something that made me freeze. On the floor, right in front, there were fine marks like recent scratches that were not on the others. I touched lightly and still felt the loose paint powder, as if it had been made that same night. I left the locker room without saying anything, but I spent the rest of the night thinking about what could have happened. There was no logic. All the cabinets were open when I came back with the caretaker, but I had clearly seen that single closed one, vibrating and emitting the metallic sound. It was impossible to forget the echo of the beats spreading through the empty environment. The next day, I tried to discreetly ask some colleagues if they had ever heard something strange in the locker room, but no one confirmed it. One of them even commented that the closet where I had seen it had been locked for years, and used, because the key had been lost. This detail made me even more restless. If no one opened that closet, how could it be vibrating as if there was someone trapped inside? I could never get into the locker room without feeling that cold in my stomach. Whenever I go through that specific closet, I feel like it's still hiding something, even though it's open and dusty like everyone else. The detail of the scratches on the floor never left my head, because it was proof that something had forced the door recently. To this day I don't know if anyone was playing with me, or if I witnessed something I shouldn't. The sound of the beats, loud and constant, is impossible to forget. And you, would you have the courage to open a closed closet that vibrates alone in a completely empty locker room? Story 6. I had just left volleyball practice when I remembered that I had left an important book in my closet. The problem is that he was in the corridor of the second floor, which, theoretically, should already be locked after school hours. Even so, when I got there, I saw that the door was ajar, as if someone had just passed by. I pushed slowly, and as soon as I entered, I realized there was something wrong. All the closet doors were open, and books and notebooks were scattered on the floor, as if someone had turned everything on purpose. Before I could react, I clearly heard the sound of footsteps running to the end of the corridor. I ran after it in an attempt to see who it was, but when I got there was no one. I stood at the end of the corridor, trying to understand what had happened. The sound of the steps had been real, accelerated, echoing between the walls as if someone was really running away from me. But there was only silence and the closets open. I walked back slowly, passing through each open door, and the feeling was that at any moment someone would appear from inside one of the closets. When I finally found mine, I realized that it was also unlocked and empty, even though I was sure I had left the book inside earlier. I looked around, trying to see if it was thrown on the floor along with the other materials, but I didn't find anything. The corridor seemed colder every minute, and the idea of being alone there began to make me panic. I decided to get out of there as soon as possible, but when I started walking towards the door, I heard the sound of footsteps again, only this time behind me. I turned immediately, and the corridor was completely empty, only with the closet doors open, swaying slightly as if someone had just touched them. The sound had stopped the moment I turned around, which only made me more nervous. I hurried my pace, but before reaching the exit, I felt as if someone had run very close to me, too fast for me to see. The light wind that lifted some leaves on the floor was enough to make me shoot in the direction of the door without looking back. When I pushed the exit door, it closed tightly behind me, as if it had been pulled from inside. I ran down the stairs until I reached the ground floor, where there were still some lights on and distant echoes of voices coming from the gym. Only there I could really breathe, but my hands were still shaking. I tried to convince myself that maybe someone had entered before me to move the cabinets, and had run away when he realized that I was there. But this explanation didn't fit with what I had seen. There was no way someone disappeared from that corridor without passing by me. The next day, I went back to check and found all the cabinets locked as always, without any sign of mess. I told 2 colleagues, and they said it wouldn't be the first time someone reported strange things on the second floor after hours. One of them even commented that teachers avoided going up there alone at night because they had already heard footsteps or doors slamming when the corridor was officially closed. To this day, I don't know what happened that night. I never found the book I had left in my closet, and every time I remember the scene of the open cabinets and the steps running down the corridor, I feel the same feeling of being followed. It wasn't just a sound lost in the echo of the empty building. It was too clear, too close to be a coincidence. Since then, I avoid going up to the second floor after training as much as possible. I'd rather even leave my things behind than have to cross that corridor again. And you, would you have the courage to enter a dark and silent corridor, listening to footsteps running to the end, only to find out that there is no one there? Story 7. It was late afternoon, and the school building was already almost empty when I went to the bathroom near the library. As soon as I entered, I realized that all the boxes were open except one. The door was closed and locked inside, as if there was someone there. I didn't care much at first, but after a few seconds I realized that there was no sound of movement, no breathing, nothing. Curiosity spoke louder, and I bent down to peek under the door. To my surprise, there were no feet. The space was completely empty. Before I could think of any explanation, I heard 3 dry, strong beats coming from inside that box. The noise echoed throughout the bathroom and made my body freeze. I ran out of the bathroom without even looking back. My first instinct was to find someone, and I ended up running into one of the employees who was closing the corridor windows. I quickly told what had happened, still panting, and asked him to accompany me there. He seemed suspicious, but agreed to go with me, probably thinking it was just a student joke. When we came back together, I pushed the bathroom door carefully. All the boxes were open, including the one I had seen locked minutes before. There was no sign that someone had been inside. The employee looked around, shook his head, and said that I had probably been frightened by the wind or by some noise coming from outside. But I knew it hadn't been that. I was silent, but inside I was sure I hadn't imagined anything. The beats were strong, rhythmic, as if someone had done it on purpose to attract attention. In addition, I had clearly seen that box was locked inside, and there was no way anyone could leave without me noticing. The bathroom had only one entrance and exit door, and I was there all the time. After the employee left, I still stood in the hallway looking at the bathroom door. A part of me wanted to go back alone to check again, but just thinking about hearing that sound again already made me panic. The feeling was that, if I entered, I would find something I shouldn't see. So I decided to get my things and leave as soon as possible. That night, at home, I kept going over the scene several times in my head. The closed box, the absolute silence, and suddenly, the 3 dry beats echoing from inside. It was impossible to forget the sound. It didn't look like wood slapping or some pipe hitting. It was clearly someone hitting the door. The more I thought, the more I felt that it had been done to scare me. The next day, I tried to comment with some friends, but they laughed and said I was probably too tired. But no one could explain how a box can be locked inside and, minutes later, appear open with no one around. This detail was what made me more uneasy, because it proved that it wasn't just something in my head. Since that day, I've never entered an empty bathroom at school alone. I always wait for someone to come in or go to another floor, even if it's further away. The memory of the beats still accompanies me, and every time I hear any sound coming from a closed box, my heart beats as if it were going to relive that scene. To this day, I don't know what was behind that door or why he seemed to want me to know that there was something there. Maybe you'll never find out, but the feeling that you weren't alone was real. And you, would you have the courage to stay in a bathroom after hearing beats coming from inside a box that should be empty? Story 8. That day I had gone to study at the library after classes, and at some point I decided to use the bathroom that was right next door. It was a normally quiet and almost always empty place, so I didn't find anything strange when entering. But as soon as I closed the door behind me, I felt a strong metallic smell mixed with mold. It was so intense that it made me nauseous at the time. I decided to check the boxes, thinking that maybe it was some broken plumbing or accumulated dirt. But when I opened one of them, I got a huge scare. The seat was covered with dark, dry spots, scattered in an irregular way. My first thought was that it looked like dried blood, and the simple idea made me drop the door and run out of there without looking back. I ran straight to the library and kept trying to catch my breath, without immediately telling anyone what I had seen. A part of me thought that if I spoke loudly, it would become even more real. After a few minutes, a friend appeared and realized that I was pale. I quickly told what had happened, and she wanted to come back with me to check. We went back together, and with every step my heart beat faster. When I pushed the bathroom door, the strange smell was no longer there. We checked the same box, and to my surprise, or perhaps relief, it was impeccably clean. There was no sign of the dark spots, no marks on the seat, nothing that could prove what I had seen before. My friend looked at me with a mixture of doubt and concern, and I insisted that I hadn't invented anything. I knew what I had seen, the stains were there, and the smell was impossible to ignore. The most disturbing thing was to think that everything had disappeared so quickly, as if someone had cleaned everything in a matter of minutes. But we didn't see anyone enter or leave the bathroom during this interval. We spent a few minutes in there trying to find any clue, but there was nothing. Not even a stain on the floor or on the tile. I was too disconcerted to continue, so I suggested that we go back to the library. On the way, I couldn't stop thinking about the detail of the strong smell of iron and mold, because it was impossible for me to have imagined something so specific. In the following days, I avoided using that bathroom as much as possible. Whenever I passed through the corridor next to the library, I remembered the scene and felt my stomach wrap. Once, I even thought I felt the same strong smell in the air when I opened the door, but I didn't have the courage to go in to confirm. I rushed back to the room, trying to ignore the feeling that something was still wrong in there. I even commented to a school employee, but she only said that the bathrooms were cleaned regularly and that she had never received complaints about odors or dirt. This only made me more uncomfortable because it meant that I would have no logical explanation for what I saw. It was as if it had happened only to me, without leaving any proof to others. To this day, whenever I remember that night at the library, I feel the same chill. I don't know if that was some kind of hallucination caused by fatigue, or if I really saw something I shouldn't. What torments me is remembering the metallic smell and the dark stains on the seat, because they were details too sharp to be just the result of my imagination. I never used that bathroom alone again. I prefer to walk to another floor or wait to get home, just so I don't run the risk of seeing all that again. And you, would you have the courage to open the door of a box after smelling a strange smell and finding something that disappears as if you had never been there? Story 9. It was late afternoon, and the school building was already almost empty when I decided to go to the bathroom before leaving. I entered normally, and the same moment I turned on the light, it blinked a few times and went out for good. The place was completely dark, and I could only smell the strong smell of disinfectant mixed with the humidity of the environment. I thought about leaving immediately, but something made me stand still for a few seconds, trying to get used to the pitch. It was then that I heard the unmistakable sound of a discharge coming from one of the boxes in the background. The noise echoed through the empty space, and soon after, wet, slow steps began, which seemed to approach where I was. My heart raced, and I was paralyzed, trying to understand what was happening. The bathroom was completely dark, there were no open windows, and no one but me should be there at that time. The wet steps continued for a few seconds, closer and closer, until they seemed to be right next to me. I held my breath, hoping to feel someone touch me. Suddenly, the lights came back with a loud slit, illuminating the entire bathroom. I ran my eyes quickly through all the boxes, but they were all open and completely empty. The floor was dry, without any trace of water, as if nothing had happened. Only silence filled the space, and I knew I hadn't imagined those sounds. I left the bathroom almost stumbling, trying to catch my breath in the illuminated corridor. My whole body trembled, and the feeling that there was still someone watching me behind the door didn't let me breathe properly. I stood still for a few seconds looking at the floor, trying to find some mark that proved what I heard, but there was nothing. On the way home, I couldn't stop thinking about the wet steps. They were too clear, too heavy, to be confused with anything else. I knew I was alone, and even so the sound came straight in my direction. The more I remembered, the more impossible it seemed to find a logical explanation. The next day, I went through the same bathroom again, but just pushing the door I felt my heart race. I entered slowly, observing every detail, and everything was normal. Firm lights, dry floor, no strange sound. But the memory of the previous night was still so strong that it seemed that the whole environment kept a heavy silence, as if it had witnessed something it shouldn't. I told some friends, and of course they laughed at me. They said I must have been too tired, or that the old bathroom lights could have been short. But that didn't explain the discharge, and especially the wet steps approaching. This detail is what haunts me the most to this day, because I know the difference between random noises and someone walking towards me. After that day, I could never use that bathroom alone again. If I need to go, I always wait for someone to come in or go to another floor, even if it's further away. The sound of wet footsteps echoes in my memory every time I step on that space, and the feeling that someone was about to leave the pitch never left me alone. To this day, I don't know if that was some kind of illusion, or if there was really something there with me, hidden in the darkness. But one thing is certain, it was too real to be just the result of my imagination. And you, would you have the courage to stand still in a completely dark bathroom after hearing wet footsteps coming towards you? Story 10. I was always one of the last to leave school because of music rehearsals. That night, I stayed up later than usual, and when I finished it was past 9. The school was silent, practically in the dark, and only a few security lights illuminated the corridors. I walked down the main corridor towards the exit, thinking only of going home. It was at that moment that I heard laughter echoing behind me. At first I thought there were still some students in the building, but soon I remembered that the school was officially closed and everyone had left. The laughter was light, almost childish, and came from somewhere in the middle of the darkness. I turned quickly to look, but as soon as I did that, they suddenly stopped, leaving only silence in the air. I stood in the middle of the corridor, trying to hear any other sound that would explain that. But all I heard was the low buzz of the fluorescent lamps. The detail is that the laughter still echoed in my head, so clear that it seemed impossible for me to have imagined. I kept walking slowly, looking over my shoulder at every step, hoping to hear again. When I got close to the double door that led to the courtyard, the laughter started again, only further away, as if they were coming from upstairs. It was strange because I knew there was no one there, and even so the sound seemed to play with me, going back and forth as if following me. My heart accelerated, and the desire to get out of there increased even more. I decided to speed up the pace, but the more I walked, the more it seemed that the sound accompanied me. It wasn't loud laughter, but low laughter, as if someone was trying to contain their laughter so as not to be discovered. That made me even more nervous, because it gave the impression that there was more than one person hiding somewhere in the building, watching my every move. I even stopped and called out loud, asking if there was anyone there, but I didn't get an answer. The silence returned so suddenly that it made me shiver from head to toe. It was as if the building had swallowed that sound at once, leaving only the echo of my own voice reverberating through the dark corridors. I hurried my steps to the exit, but before reaching the door I felt the laughter again, this time right behind me, close enough to distinguish different tones of voice. I turned quickly, sure that I would finally see someone, but the corridor was completely empty. The emergency lights flashed slowly, projecting long shadows on the walls, and nothing moved beyond that. My instinct was to run. I pushed the door hard and went out to the courtyard, taking a deep breath. Only when I reached the school gate did I feel relatively safe. Still, the laughter was still alive in my mind, as if they were glued to the silence of the night. The detail that tormented me was their clarity. They were not distant echoes or a confused noise. They were laughter too clear not to be real. The next day, I asked one of the security guards if anyone was still circulating around the school at night, but he assured that after 9 all the doors were locked and only he remained in the building. That made me even more uneasy, because if no one else was there, where did those voices come from? I avoided commenting with other colleagues, because I knew they would laugh or say I was too tired. To this day, whenever I remember those laughs in the empty hallway, I feel the same pressure in my chest. I don't know if they were echoes of something old, or if there was really someone hiding watching me, but I know it wasn't imagination. And you, would you have the courage to cross a completely dark corridor listening to laughter behind you, knowing that you are alone? Last story. It was late afternoon, and I had stayed a few more minutes at school to finish a job. Before leaving, I decided to go to the bathroom to touch up my makeup, since then I was going straight to meet some friends. I was alone, facing the mirror, focused on fixing my eyes when something caught my attention. By the reflection, I clearly saw the silhouette of someone passing behind me, towards the boxes in the background. It was a quick, natural movement, as if it were another student entering. My heart shot at the time. I came immediately, but there was no one there. The bathroom was completely empty, and the exit door was still closed, just like when I entered. I stood still, staring at the pits, waiting to hear some sound that would confirm that there was someone inside. But the silence was total. Only the distant noise of the corridor reached me. I walked slowly to the doors, opening one by one, and they were all empty. The more I confirmed that there was no one, the more the memory of the figure passing behind me through the mirror made me nervous. I went back to the sink, trying to convince myself that maybe it had been a shadow or reflection of some lamp. But when I looked up again, the mirror looked different. There was nothing explicit, but I had the strange feeling that the reflected image was a few seconds behind my movements. That made me leave there without thinking twice. I crossed the door almost stumbling, and only when I got to the corridor did I take a deep breath. Still, I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something had been left behind, watching me through the mirror. I took my things from the closet and went straight to the exit, avoiding looking at any reflective surface on the way. My heart was still racing, as if I had run. The next day, during the break, I commented on what I had seen with a colleague. To my surprise, she said it wasn't the first time someone reported strange things in that bathroom. He commented that some girls had already sworn to see figures in the reflection while getting ready, but when they looked directly, there was nothing. That only confirmed that I wasn't imagining. After that, I started to avoid that bathroom as much as possible. If I needed to use it, I was never alone and avoided looking at myself in the mirror for a long time. The detail that haunted me the most was remembering the movement I saw reflected, the way of someone walking normally, as if they were in a hurry. It didn't look like a vague or distorted shadow. It looked like a real person passing behind me. As much as I tried to find a logical explanation, nothing made sense. The exit door was closed all the time, and I was sure that no one came in after me. The delayed reflection I noticed later only reinforced the feeling that there was something wrong with that mirror, as if it showed more than it should. To this day, when I remember that scene, I feel a chill that accompanies me for hours. I avoid going into any school bathroom alone as much as possible, especially in that one. The feeling that there was someone there with me, visible only by the reflection, is something I could never forget. No matter how many times you try to convince me that it was just a game of light, I know what I saw. Since then, whenever I look in the mirror for a long time, I get afraid of seeing something moving behind me that shouldn't be there. That night taught me that sometimes what we see by reflection may not really be in the environment. And you, Would you have the courage to face your reflection alone after seeing a figure passing right behind you? Thank you very much for your company until the end. Your support is what gives life to this channel. If these stories have caught you, don't forget to leave your like and comment on your opinion. And if you are not yet part of our community, sign up now to receive the next real horror stories.